We are very fortunate this afternoon because we have 3 members of Parliament who share the passion about population and development issues. The first speaker is Parliamentary Secretary Bob McMullan, who is the local member for Canberra. I'm going to use Bob's own words as an introduction, and I don't believe in long introductions, but in a recent activity at which Bob was speaking, he said about himself that he's been around for a long time. He's been in government, out of government and back in government again. He's been on the front bench, the back bench and all places in between. Bob McMullan.
Thanks very much, Claire, and congratulations on being elected as the chair of the Parliamentary Group on Population and Development. It's one of the bipartisan parliamentary groups that works extremely well and has been effective in the past, and I hope it will be in the future. And it's good to see some old friends here from my previous existence as senator and other things, so it's a pleasure to be here. What I wanted to talk about within the broad framework of the conference is the issue of empowerment of women and its implications for the Millennium Development Goals generally, and as it relates particularly, of course, to issues of population, but not only that. The evidence is very clear, and each time you revise your information base and go back and look at the new data, it reinforces the view that if we pursue an objective of educating women and giving women more control over their lives, all the independent evidence says that that process of education, that process of empowerment, and the parallel question of improving women's health, those 3 things together are the best investment in improving our outcomes as we pursue the Millennium Development Goals. Now, there's another way of saying the same thing, I guess, which is there's a very strong positive relationship between the education of women and girls, reduced maternal and child mortality, and economic development. Increased education for women and girls promotes economic development. Improved education for women and girls improves maternal and child health, and improved maternal and child health promotes economic development. There's really a couple of different ways of making the same point. But the data is very compelling. I sometimes puzzle that people seek to challenge the central thesis. Of course, you can have a disagreement about the policy consequences of the data. You can say, well, that leads me to this conclusion or that conclusion, or this policy position or that policy position. In democracies, that's healthy. In other places, it's dangerous, but it's a debate that still goes on irrespective. But it is very clear. Now, many of you will know that for my sins before I was in Parliament, I was trained as an economist, so let me look at some of it from an economic point of view, but the data is equally compelling from a pursuit of most of the social statistics as well. But the data about the investment in women and its implications leads you to some very interesting and inevitable conclusions. A 1 percentage point increase in the rate of female education raises the average level of GDP by 0.37% and economic growth rates by 0.2% on average. That is, it lifts the overall level and the rate at which it grows. Girls with more schooling participate in greater numbers in the formal labour force when they grow up, and consequently they're able to earn more. That women invest their earnings in their family, including feeding their children and sending them to school, which leads us to the important conclusion that there's a significant decline in some of the other Millennium Development Goal challenges, such as issues like malnutrition. Before I talk about this in relation to the Millennium Development Goals, there's one other part of the statistical framework I want to refer to. And normally throwing statistics around like this without all sorts of charts and things is dangerous, but I know you all know this subject very well, so that I can talk about it in these ways with comfort. But the conventional assessment has often been expressed in this way, and I'll do it, but then I think there's a better modern way of doing it, that 1 extra year of schooling reduces fertility by 0.3 to 0.5 children per woman. Now, that's it's broadly right. The direction of that data is broadly right, but it's a bit simplistically stated, because when the increase in the data seems to show that when the increase in education is just 1 extra year of primary education, it doesn't have so much effect. But once you start to get to secondary education, the effect is very powerful. And so what the data shows in a more contemporary analysis, and this comes from a recent report many of you will be aware of called Girls Count, a global investment and action agenda, and it says in part, in countries where few children receive secondary schooling, particularly few girls, family size averages more than 5 children, of whom 1 or 2 die in infancy. But in countries where at least half the girls receive secondary schooling, women average just over 3 children, and child deaths are rare. So when you start to put all that statistical data together and create any sort of framework around it, the relationship of that investment in girls' education and in women's health and maternal health in particular, and the Millennium Development Goals becomes strong. Some of it's obvious because the goals themselves are explicitly stated in terms of increasing the level of education and the equity of gender access to education and improvement in maternal health. But I'm talking about all the secondary goals as well. Many of them, our chance of pursuing those effectively are significantly enhanced by that level of investment. Because the Millennium Development Goals recognise the importance of investing in women's education and health. The Millennium Development Goal number 3 is about promoting gender equality and empowering women. And in our region, overall the region is tracking well as a whole towards achieving gender equity in education. I'm looking for a bit more, I haven't got it yet, I'm looking for a bit more breakdown in the data, because I think if you broke the Asia Pacific into 2, you might find that there's a bigger difference in the Pacific than there is in Asia. But the data I've got so far doesn't enable me to disaggregate in that manner, and at the moment it's saying good news that in terms of gender equity overall, we are making reasonably good progress in the Asia Pacific region, but there are still some countries where there are serious problems in our region. Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands and Cambodia being the 3 that stand out from the data. The target of Millennium Development Goal 5 is to reduce by 3/4 the maternal mortality rate by 2015. The news is not so good for our region in that regard. The Asia Pacific region's overall maternal mortality rate is 30% higher than the rate in Latin America and the Caribbean, and is especially high in Laos, in our region, in Laos, Cambodia, Papua New Guinea, Indonesia and Timor-Leste. So we have a lot to do, and some parts of the agenda are proceeding moderately well, others we have a lot to do in some countries, and you'll see a certain consistency in the countries whose names come up. We certainly have a big agenda ahead of us. What we need to put into our planning as we go forward, and one of the reasons I was pleased to come here was to have the opportunity, firstly, to make myself discipline my thinking about it, but to develop and to, as the discussion flows at this conference, I won't be able to stay, but I'll get reports on it, that how we can integrate more effectively the lessons that this data should teach us into our program going forward. because the relationship between women's education, maternal health, children's health and economic and social progress is very powerful.